The echoes of the mansion. I am 82 years old now, and my trembling hands find comfort in the warmth of a porcelain teacup every morning. The mansion I live in feels emptier with each passing year, its long corridors whispering names that taken away. But every creak in the floorboards, every flutter of the curtains, reminds me of the girl I once was. The 18-year-old who believed the world was still kind. When I was young, this mansion was alive. The sunlight used to pour through the tall windows and dance on the marble floors. The laughter of my little brother Leo would echo through the halls like music. My father, Henry, was a man of immense presence, tall, calm, and always smelling faintly of tobacco and oak wood. And my mother, oh, she was the soul of this house. Her name was Margaret, graceful, gentle, and filled with a warmth that made even the darkest days seem bright. I still remember her voice, soft like a lullaby. When I was a child, she would tuck me in and tell me stories about how she and father met. She used to say their love was not written in stars but in rain. The day they met, the sky had poured for hours. Father was a young businessman then, travelling from one city to another to sell imported fabrics. He used to visit small towns to find new suppliers and artisans. One evening, when his carriage broke down on a muddy road near a small village, he sought shelter in a local inn. And that's where he saw her. Mother worked there part-time, helping her uncle, who owned the place. She was only 19, with a spark in her eyes that could melt the hardest of hearts. Father once told me that when she handed him a cup of tea, he knew, right then, that he would never love another woman again. They married 2 years later, against all odds. Father's family wasn't pleased. They thought she was beneath him, but he didn't care. He left everything behind, built his business on his own, and bought the mansion that I grew up in. That house was their dream. Every brick of it carried their love story. But love stories, I've learned, don't always end the way they begin. When I was 15, Mother fell ill. The doctors said it was pneumonia, and at first, Father refused to believe it could be serious. But I saw it in her eyes. She knew she wouldn't survive. For days she lay in her bed near the big window that overlooked the garden she adored. I remember holding her hand, whispering that she couldn't leave us. She smiled and told me, "Be strong for your brother, be strong for your father." She passed away that winter. I can still smell the faint scent of the lavender perfume she used to wear. I was 15, old enough to understand death, but too young to accept it. Father broke completely after her funeral. He would sit alone in his study for hours, staring at her portrait. For months, the mansion was silent except for Leo's cries. He was only a year old then, too young to even remember her face. I became the caretaker of both my father and my baby brother. I fed Leo, rocked him to sleep, told him stories Mother would have told. I tried to smile for Father's sake, but deep down something in me had cracked. The world had lost its colour. 3 years later, Father changed. He started spending more time away from home. His hair turned grey quicker than I expected. He smiled less, laughed never. Then one day, he came home and announced that he was going to remarry. Her name was Amelia. I remember the moment she walked into our mansion for the first time. Tall, beautiful, dressed in emerald green with eyes sharp as a blade. She must have been 30, maybe younger, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who always got what she wanted. Father introduced her with a proud smile I hadn't seen in years. He said she made him feel young again, but from the first day, something about her unsettled me. She was too perfect, too sweet in front of Father, yet when he wasn't looking, it's like a shadow hiding from the light. Leo, who was 4 at that time, didn't like her either. He once whispered to me, "Sister, she looks at me like she doesn't want me here." I told him he was imagining it, but deep down I knew he wasn't. Within weeks of her arrival, the atmosphere in the mansion began to change. She replaced the curtains, the furniture, even the flowers in the garden, the same garden my mother had planted with her own hands. She said she wanted a fresh start, but to me it felt like she was erasing my mother's memory from every corner of our home. Then came the whispers. Late at night, I would hear her talking on the phone in hushed tones, or sometimes sneaking out of the house in her car. One evening, I followed her. I wasn't sure why I did it. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. I watched from the window as she met a man near the garden gate. I couldn't hear much, but I saw the way she smiled, the way her hand lingered on his arm. His name, I would later learn, was James. James was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s. He owned a nearby construction company and had recently lost his wife to cancer. People in town pitied him, but what they didn't know was that Amelia had known him long before she met my father. They had been lovers once. In college, I overheard later, and now fate had conveniently brought them back together. Amelia's plan was cruelly simple. My father's wealth had grown over the years, and with it the value of the mansion and his businesses. If she could control him, or better yet, inherit everything after his death, she could live comfortably forever. And for that, Leo and I were obstacles. She started small. She would tell father that I was disrespectful, that I didn't listen to her, that I was careless with the household money. Once, she accused me of stealing jewellery from her drawer, a lie so absurd that even father hesitated to believe it. But Amelia was clever. She knew how to act hurt, how to cry at just the right moment. Slowly, she began to poison father's mind. He became distant again. I could see doubt in his eyes when he looked at me. That broke my heart more than anything. Then came the day she tried to make me leave. I was in the kitchen helping the maid when Amelia walked in, holding a letter in her hand. Her lips were curved into a mocking smile. "Your father doesn't need you here anymore," she said calmly. "You're grown now. It's time you learn to live on your own." I stared at her, shocked. "What do you mean? This is my home." "Not anymore," she whispered, stepping closer. "Leave before things get ugly. I'll make sure you regret it if you stay." My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to shout, to run to father and tell him everything. But when I did, she was already there, crying in his arms, pretending I had threatened her. I'll never forget the look of confusion and pain on his face when he asked me to apologize to her. That night I sat in my room, holding Leo close as he slept. The moonlight fell across the carpet, and I made a promise to myself I would protect my little brother, no matter what Amelia planned. But I didn't know then that darker secrets were still waiting to come to light. Secrets that would tear our family apart forever. Days in the mansion began to feel longer and colder after that night. Father was kind to me, but I could sense the distance growing between us. He avoided long conversations, always in a hurry, always busy with his meetings. Whenever Amelia was near, he seemed to change. His eyes softened for her, and the authority that once ruled this house now belonged to her gentle voice. I watched her carefully. There was something in the way she moved through the rooms, always calm, always graceful, but her presence filled the air with tension. She had a way of smiling at the maids that made them nervous, a way of touching father's arm that made me uneasy. I started to notice small things disappearing. A gold watch from his drawer, a silver bracelet from the cupboard, some cash from his wallet. Each time I wondered if father noticed. If he did, he said nothing. One evening I was walking down the corridor near father's study. I heard voices behind the closed door. Amelia was speaking in a low tone, her words too soft to catch, but her laughter was sharp. The second voice was a man's. I pressed my ear against the wood, my heart pounding. I recognized it at once. James. So he was here, inside our house. When I peeked through the keyhole, I saw them standing close, too close. Her hand rested on his chest, and he leaned toward her with that familiar look that only lovers share. My stomach twisted. They were whispering, planning something. I didn't stay long. I turned away before I could hear more. I went back to my room, trembling, the world spinning around me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about father, about how he trusted her blindly, how she sat beside him every morning, pouring his tea, smiling like she was the perfect wife. And all the while she was betraying him under the same roof. The next morning, she was as radiant as ever. She came into the dining hall wearing a pale blue dress, her hair pinned up with pearls. Father complimented her, and she blushed like a young bride. I sat there silently, watching the two of them. Leo played with his toy cars beside me, innocent and unaware of the storm gathering above us. After breakfast, father left for his office, and Amelia turned to me with that cold half-smile I had grown to fear. She told me to look after Leo and not to wander into her room. Her voice was sugar, but her eyes were knives. As soon as she left, I did exactly the opposite. Her room was neat, almost too perfect. everything arranged with precision. But when I opened the drawer of her vanity table, I found an envelope filled with cash and a small photograph. The photograph was old and slightly torn at the edge. It showed Amelia and James standing together in front of a university building, arms around each other, smiling. On the back were the words, "Forever yours," written in her handwriting. I hid the photo in my dress pocket before closing the drawer. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. If I told Father, he might think I was lying again. Amelia had poisoned his trust. Later that week, things began to worsen. Father had an argument with one of his business partners and came home angry. Amelia comforted him in front of everyone, but the moment he went upstairs, she turned on me. She accused me of spreading rumours about her to the servants. She said I was jealous of her, that I couldn't bear to see Father happy. Her words were cruel and deliberate, and the maid stood there watching as if afraid to breathe. When Father came down later, she pretended to cry. I tried to explain, but he silenced me with a look. That look broke something inside me. I realised then that I was alone in my own home. Days turned into weeks. Amelia's control tightened. She began to handle Father's accounts, his meetings, even his correspondence. He let her. He trusted her with everything. I saw her sneaking out once again to meet James near the garden, just as before. Only this time she was carrying a small leather bag. When she returned, I noticed Father's office safe was slightly open. Some documents were missing. I wanted to confront her, but I couldn't risk Leo's safety. She had started to treat him harshly too. Once I heard him crying because she had locked him in his room for spilling juice on the carpet. I ran and freed him, holding him close as he sobbed against my chest. I swore I would never let her harm him again. But Amelia was careful. She played her game slowly, twisting the truth in ways I couldn't prove. And Father, blind with affection, didn't see it. Then came the night. Everything began to change. It was raining heavily and the mansion was wrapped in thunder. Father had gone on a short business trip and Amelia said she would stay up late to finish some papers. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to get water. As I passed by the study, I saw the light under the door. I thought she might be inside. When I pushed the door open a little, I froze. James was there again. He was pacing the floor, his coat wet from the rain. Amelia stood by the window, her voice tense. They were arguing. She said something about needing more time, about the will not being ready yet. My breath caught. The will. James told her he was tired of waiting, that they could take what they needed and disappear. She told him to be patient, that Father had already started trusting her with the financial decisions. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She mentioned an insurance policy. I couldn't listen anymore. My heart was pounding so loudly I was afraid they would hear me. I backed away from the door and ran to my room, gasping for air. Amelia was planning something far worse than betrayal. She was planning to ruin him completely, maybe even something darker. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by Leo's bed, watching him breathe, thinking about Mother. I imagined her voice telling me to be brave. She always used to say truth has its own light. Maybe it was time to bring that light back into our home. The next morning I began to plan. I woke before dawn the next day, unable to shake off the heaviness in my chest. The sky was still dark, and the rain had softened into a drizzle that tapped against the windows. Leo was still asleep, his small hand resting near mine. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, gathering the courage I knew I would need. I had no one to turn to. The servants respected Amelia out of fear, and Father's trust in her had become unshakable. If I accused her without proof, she would twist my words again and make me the villain. I needed evidence, something that would open his eyes. I remembered the photograph I had hidden in my drawer, the one of Amelia and James from their college days. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was a start. I decided to watch her more closely, to follow every move she made. For days I did just that. I kept my distance, pretending to go about my chores, but my eyes were always on her. She spent hours on the phone when Father was away. Sometimes she whispered, other times she sounded angry, but she always hung up quickly when someone walked by. I noticed she kept a small black notebook with her at all times. It never left her side, not even when she went to the garden. One afternoon, I saw her leave the house with that notebook tucked under her arm. She thought I was upstairs with Leo, but I followed her quietly. The air smelled of jasmine, and the sun was slipping behind the clouds. She walked to the far end of the property, near the old stone wall where wildflowers grew. James was waiting there. I hid behind a tree and listened. She told him she was close, that father had finally signed some papers she needed. James asked about me, his voice sharp. She said I was a problem, but not for long. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. They talked about leaving together, about money, about freedom. When they parted, she placed the notebook in her handbag. I waited until she was back in the house before I ran to the garden gate. James had left a torn piece of paper on the bench where he sat. I picked it up and read a few words that confirmed my worst fears. The words insurance claim and Henry's signature. My hands trembled. It was no longer about greed alone. She was planning something far more dangerous. That night I locked my door and hid the torn paper with the photograph. I didn't know what to do yet, but I knew I had to act fast. Father was returning from his business trip the next evening, and Amelia would have the perfect chance to move forward with whatever she was planning. The next day passed in slow motion. Amelia was calm, almost too calm. She hummed softly as she arranged flowers on the dining table, her movements precise, her smile fixed. I watched her pour something into a small crystal bottle and slip it into the pocket of her dress. My heart thudded in my chest. Father arrived just before sunset. Leo ran to him, his laughter echoing through the hall, and for a brief moment I saw joy in Father's eyes again. He lifted Leo in his arms, hugged him tight, and looked at me with a tired but gentle smile. Then Amelia appeared, radiant as ever, greeting him like a devoted wife. She led him to the table, fussed over his coat, his drink, his food. I couldn't eat that night. My throat was tight, my palms cold. Amelia poured him a glass of wine and filled her own. Father raised his glass, thanking her for taking care of things while he was away. She smiled and touched his arm, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. When she turned to reach for the bread, I saw my chance. I leaned closer to Father and whispered that I needed to talk to him later, alone. He nodded absently, not sensing the urgency in my voice. After dinner, Amelia suggested he rest in the study while she prepared tea. The crystal bottle was still in her pocket. My pulse quickened. As she entered the kitchen, I followed silently. I saw her pour a few drops from that bottle into one of the teacups. Then she stirred it and placed both cups on a tray. She turned around and froze. I was standing there. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain had started again outside, pattering softly against the windows. Her face changed. The gentle mask dropped, and what remained was something sharp and cold. She asked me what I was doing there, her tone low and dangerous. I didn't answer. I walked toward her slowly and picked up the cup she had poured from the bottle. My hand was steady, even though my heart was not. I told her she wouldn't get away with it, that I knew everything. James, the money, the papers, the lies. Her eyes narrowed. She said Father would never believe me, that he saw me as an ungrateful child. She stepped closer and tried to snatch the cup from my hand, but I held it behind me. I told her I had proof, and that if anything happened to Father, the police would find it. For a moment I thought she might strike me. Her lips trembled, but then she smiled. Not with kindness, but with venom. She said I was just like my mother, always getting in the way, always too righteous to understand how the world worked. Then she whispered that my mother's death had been easier than mine would be. Those words made my blood turn to ice. Before I could react, she pushed past me and stormed out of the kitchen. I ran after her, but she was already halfway up the stairs. She went straight to her room, locked the door, and I heard the sound of glass shattering inside. I didn't know what to do. Father came down the hall moments later, confused by the noise. He asked what had happened, and I told him everything. I didn't hold back this time. Every secret, every meeting, every lie. He stared at me in disbelief at first, but when I showed him the photograph and the torn paper from the garden, something inside him broke. He rushed to Amelia's door, calling her name. No answer. He forced the door open, and what we saw made him stagger. She was sitting by the vanity, her hands trembling, her face pale. The broken bottle lay on the floor. She looked at Father, then at me, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Father said nothing. He turned and walked out of the room, his shoulders heavy. I followed him to the study, where he sank into the chair, covering his face with his hands. He didn't cry, but the silence between us was worse than tears. That night, Amelia left the mansion. She didn't take much, only a suitcase and her handbag. I watched her from the balcony as she stepped into the car and drove away into the rain. She didn't look back. For a while, I thought it was over. I thought we could finally breathe again. But I was wrong. She had left more than just pain behind. She had left chaos that would soon come back to us in ways I could never have imagined. Follow after Amelia left. The silence that once brought comfort now carried unease. Father rarely spoke, and when he did, his words came out heavy, as if weighed down by shame and regret. I understood him. He had loved her blindly, trusted her completely, and now that trust had shattered. He spent long hours in his study, sometimes staring at the documents she had tampered with, sometimes just sitting there in silence, lost in thought. Leo was my only light during those weeks. He would run through the hallways, his laughter echoing faintly, trying to bring life back into the house. I tried my best to smile for him, to pretend everything was normal, but the weight in my chest refused to lift. Father began to fall ill soon after. The stress of what had happened took its toll. His once steady hands now trembled, and the man who once ruled over boardrooms and business meetings could barely make it down the stairs. I called the doctor, who said it was exhaustion and prescribed rest, but I could see in Father's eyes that it was more than that. He was breaking from the inside. A month passed quietly. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Father, but when I saw the handwriting, my heart skipped a beat. It was Amelia's. Father was sitting in his chair near the fireplace when I handed it to him. He looked at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he tore it open and began to read. I watched his face pale as his eyes moved across the page. When he finished, he didn't speak. He simply folded the letter, stood up and walked to his study, closing the door behind him. Later, when he had gone to bed, I found the letter on his desk. I shouldn't have read it, but I couldn't stop myself. It was brief, written in her elegant looping handwriting. She said she was sorry for what had happened, but that she had done what she had to do. She mentioned James only once, saying that he had made her promises he never kept. Then she wrote something that chilled me, that Father would soon understand that her departure didn't mean her absence. I didn't know what she meant at the time. I would soon find out. 2 days later, men came to the mansion. They said they were from the bank. They carried folders, papers, and polite, but firm voices. Father was too weak to meet them, so I sat with them in the parlour. They said the company had outstanding debts, that certain accounts had been drained, and that large amounts of money had been transferred under Amelia's authorization. I told them that couldn't be true, that my father would never allow it. But when they showed me the documents, I saw his signature at the bottom of every page. His real signature. Amelia had planned it all long before she left. They left after an hour, leaving behind papers that would take everything Father had built. I went to his room and found him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the window. I told him what had happened. He didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, his voice soft when he said he knew. He had already seen it coming. The following weeks were a blur of meetings and letters, lawyers and calls. Father sold off parts of his business to pay the debts, but it wasn't enough. Slowly we lost everything. The investments, the company, the cars, and finally the mansion itself. The house my parents had built out of love, the house that held every memory of my childhood, was no longer ours. I remember the day we left. The air was heavy and the sky grey. I walked through every room one last time. I touched the walls, the furniture, the curtains that still carried the faint scent of lavender from my mother's garden. Leo held my hand tightly, confused and scared. He didn't understand why we were leaving. Father stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. He looked at me and said that sometimes life takes everything from us so we can learn what truly matters. I didn't know if I believed him, but I held on to those words anyway. We moved into a small cottage on the outskirts of town. It was nothing like the mansion, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a garden where Leo played with pebbles and sticks. I took care of Father and my brother as best as I could. I worked at a local shop to earn money, while father spent his days reading and writing letters he never sent. Time passed slowly, but for a while there was peace. I began to think Amelia was gone for good, that maybe she had found her own ruin somewhere far away. But fate wasn't finished with us yet. One evening, as I walked home from work, I saw a familiar figure near the old post office. A woman dressed in a black coat standing by the corner, her face hidden by a hat. When she turned, my breath caught in my throat. It was Amelia. She saw me too. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she smiled, that same cold, perfect smile that had haunted my dreams. She didn't say a word. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog. When I reached home, I found father sitting by the window, his face pale again. He said a letter had come for him that afternoon, unsigned, but written in the same elegant hand. It contained nothing but a photograph of the mansion, our old home, and a single sentence beneath it. It said, "Some things never stay buried." That night, father couldn't sleep. He kept pacing the floor, his hands shaking. I told him it was just another attempt to frighten us. But he said it wasn't fear he felt, it was guilt. He told me he should have listened to me sooner, that he had seen the warning signs and ignored them because he was lonely. I held his hand and told him he did what he thought was right. He passed away a few weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. I found him in the morning, his expression calm, as if he had finally found the forgiveness he had been seeking. Leo and I buried him beside Mother, under the old oak tree near the hill, the same tree where they used to sit when they were young, dreaming of the future. I stood there in silence, the wind cold against my face, and I remembered their love story, how it began with rain and laughter, how it ended in sorrow and lessons learned too late. Amelia never came back after that. I heard rumours years later that James had left her, that she had moved to another city under a different name. I didn't care anymore. I had Leo to raise, and that was all that mattered. But even now, as I sit here in this old cottage, I can still see the mansion in my mind, the long hallways, the scent of my mother's flowers, my father's laughter before life broke him, and the shadow of a woman who tried to destroy it all. Sometimes in my dreams, I walk through that mansion again. I hear Leo's laughter echoing down the hall, and my mother's voice calling from the garden. I see father smiling at her the way he used to when they were young. For a moment, everything feels whole again, and then I wake and the silence returns. Years have passed since those days. Decades, in truth. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories, but some remain clear as if carved into the heart itself. I am old now, and Leo is no longer the little boy who once clung to my hand. He is a man, strong and kind, with a family of his own. He still visits me every Sunday, bringing his children who fill this quiet cottage with laughter that reminds me of the days we once had, back when the world was both cruel and beautiful. Sometimes when he looks at me, I see father's calmness in his eyes and mother's warmth in his smile. He has become everything I ever hoped he would be. Gentle, honest, protective. Watching him live the life I fought to give him is my greatest comfort. After father's death, life was not easy. I worked hard to keep us afloat. I taught sewing to young girls in the village, cooked for families, and tended to our little garden. Leo helped as he grew older, and together we rebuilt our world piece by piece. The pain of the past never truly left, but we learned how to live beside it. It became a quiet companion, reminding us of what we had survived. There were nights I would sit alone by the window, watching the moonlight spill over the fields, and I would think about Amelia. I used to wonder if she ever regretted what she did, if guilt ever reached her heart. There were times I hated her with all my being, and other times I pitied her. She had everything she could ever want, yet she destroyed it with her own hands. Maybe that was her punishment, to live knowing she had turned love into ashes. One day, many years later, I received a letter. The envelope had no name, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a single page with a few words written in an unsteady hand. It said, "I am sorry for everything. I have nothing left but memories, and even they haunt me. Forgive me if you can." There was no address, no return name, only that message. I never heard from her again after that. I don't know if she wrote it from guilt or loneliness, or if it was her final attempt to find peace before the end. I could have torn it apart, but I didn't. I kept it. Not because I forgave her completely, but because I wanted to remember that even those who hurt us deeply are still human, still capable of breaking under the weight of their own choices. As the years went on, I learned to find peace in smaller things. The sound of rain on the roof reminded me of my parents' love story. The scent of lavender in the garden reminded me of my mother's hands tending to her flowers. The warmth of sunlight through the curtains made me think of Leo's laughter when he was young. The mansion may have been taken from us, but the memories, those could never be stolen. Sometimes people in the village ask me if I miss the life we had, the wealth, the grandeur, the status. I always smile and tell them no. What I miss are the people who made that house a home. The moments of love, the laughter echoing in the halls, the nights we sat by the fire and believed that nothing could ever break us. Those are the treasures I carry with me. Now, as I sit by this window in my old wooden chair, I find comfort in the quiet. The days are slower, the nights longer, but they are peaceful. I wake with the dawn, make myself a cup of tea, and watch the sun rise over the hills. The world feels softer now, gentler somehow. I suppose when you've seen enough loss, you learn to appreciate the smallest signs of life. A bird singing, the scent of earth after rain, the laughter of a child in the distance. Sometimes I dream of the mansion again. In my dreams, it stands tall and bright, untouched by betrayal or sorrow. I walk through its halls, and every room is filled with light. Mother is there, smiling in her garden. Father is reading in his study, his eyes warm and kind. Leo is running down the staircase, his little feet echoing on the marble floors. I call out to them, and they all turn to me with love. When I wake from those dreams, I don't feel sad anymore. I feel grateful. Grateful that I was given love, even if it didn't last forever. Grateful that I had the strength to endure. Grateful that I could raise Leo to be the man he became. If life has taught me anything, it's that pain changes us, but it doesn't have to destroy us. We can choose to rebuild, to love again, to forgive, even when forgiveness feels impossible. Now, as I near the end of my story, I often wonder what people will remember about me. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe just that I was a woman who lived in a grand house once, who lost everything and yet found peace in the ruins. And that is enough. The evening sun slips through the curtains now, painting the room in gold. Leo's children are playing outside, their laughter carrying through the open window. I close my eyes and listen. It feels like the past and the present are holding hands. My life was not perfect, it was not easy, but it was mine. And as I take this breath, as the wind rustles through the trees outside, I know that somewhere, beyond time, beyond memory, Mother and Father are smiling, proud of the girl who once lived in that mansion and never stopped fighting for love. The echoes of the past no longer hurt. They sing now, soft and distant like an old lullaby fading into peace.